There is an animal living on the vertical faces of the world's most dangerous mountains that has essentially solved the problem of gravity, not worked around it, not adapted to tolerate it, solved it completely. In a way that continues to baffle biomechanics researchers who have spent careers studying how living things move through difficult terrain. Because what this animal does should not work as well as it works. And yet here it is, running full speed across cliff faces that a trained human rock climber would look at and refuse, without ropes, without hesitation, without apparent awareness that what it is doing is supposed to be impossible. The mountain goat is one of the most misunderstood and underappreciated animals on the planet. Not because people dislike it, because people think they understand it. They see the pictures, they see the videos of the goats on the impossible walls. They say something like, wow, crazy, and they move on. They do not stop to ask the question that actually matters, which is how. Not how in the vague sense of, well, they have good hooves and strong legs. How in the actual sense. The biomechanical, evolutionary, physiological, behavioral, ecological how. Because when you actually go into that question, when you follow it all the way down, what you find is not a simple adaptation story. What you find is a complete system, a whole interlocking architecture of physical and behavioral and physiological solutions to the problem of living in the most extreme terrain that terrestrial mammals can occupy. Solutions so thoroughly integrated with each other that pulling any one of them out would cause the whole thing to collapse. We are going to follow that question all the way down today. And by the end of it, I promise you, you will never look at a mountain goat the same way again. Subscribe right now if you want to understand the natural world the way it actually works, not the surface version, not the wow crazy version, but the real version, the deep version, the one that changes how you see everything. Let's go. Let us start with the feet, because you cannot talk about mountain goats without talking about the feet, and most people who talk about the feet stop too soon. They say the hooves have a hard outer rim and a soft inner pad, and that is what makes them grippy. This is true. This is also roughly equivalent to describing a Formula One racing car by saying it has wheels that are round. Technically accurate, missing almost everything. The hoof of a mountain goat is a precision instrument developed over millions of years of iterative refinement in one of the harshest testing environments imaginable. Let us go through what it actually does. The outer edge of the hoof is made of a hard keratinous material, the same basic protein that makes up your fingernails, but structured and arranged in a way that is specific to the demands of rocky terrain. This hard rim acts as a crampon. When a mountain goat steps onto a sloping rock surface, the rim bites into any small irregularity in the surface, any microcrack or grain boundary or slight roughness, and registers a purchase that a smooth surface would not allow. On the hardest, most polished rock, the rim still provides edge contact, like the edge of a blade, distributing the animal's weight along a narrow line of contact that maximizes pressure and therefore grip. But inside that hard rim is where things get genuinely interesting. The inner pad of the mountain goat's hoof is soft, rubbery, and concave, not slightly concave, noticeably concave in a way that you can see clearly when you look at the underside of the foot. This concavity functions as a suction element. When the hoof is pressed against a flat rock surface, the rim seals against the rock. The soft inner pad deforms slightly to conform to any irregularities in the surface, and the system creates a low-pressure zone that provides adhesion in addition to friction. The mountain goat's hoof, in other words, does not just grip rock the way a rubber shoe grips rock. It partially sticks to rock the way a suction cup partially sticks to a window. This is a different physical mechanism. It provides an additional margin of security on surfaces where friction alone would be insufficient. Now add to this the dew claws. The dew claws are the two small projections on the back of the lower leg just above the hoof that in many hoofed animals are vestigial, evolutionary remnants of toes that no longer serve a primary function. In mountain goats, they are not vestigial, they are functional. They are positioned such that when a mountain goat is descending a very steep slope, when the body weight is shifted forward and downward and there is enormous pressure on the front of the foot, the dew claws can make contact with the rock surface and provide additional braking points. They are backup friction elements, deployed automatically by the geometry of the animal's leg under the specific conditions, steep descent under load, where they are most needed. Evolution did not get rid of the dew claws in mountain goats the way it got rid of them in many other ungulates. Evolution kept them and repositioned them for a specific purpose. That is the level of detail we are talking about. The whole foot is also highly flexible in a way that the hooves of plains-dwelling ungulates like horses or cattle are not. A mountain goat's two toes can spread apart significantly, almost independently of each other, in a way that allows the hoof to conform to irregular surfaces, to have one toe contacting a slightly higher point on the rock, while the other contacts a lower point, distributing the load across both rather than forcing the whole foot to find a single level contact point. On a rock face covered in ledges and protrusions of different heights, this toe independence means the goat can always find a stable base even when no two contact points are at the same level. It is the difference between a rigid platform and a self-leveling platform. One of them works only when the ground is flat, the other works always. In all of this, the hard rim and the soft pad and the suction effect and the duclaws and the spreading toes is just the hoof. We have not even started on the leg yet. The legs of mountain goats are proportionally shorter and more muscular than the legs of ungulates that live in open, flat terrain. This is not an accident. Short legs lower the center of gravity, which provides stability on slopes. They also shorten the lever arm of the leg, which means that the muscles controlling the leg do not need to generate as much torque to produce a given level of force at the hoof. Shorter legs are stronger legs, in the sense that the same amount of muscle produces more effective force through a shorter limb. On a mountain face where a single misstep means a fall of hundreds of meters, the structural choice to prioritize stability and effective strength over speed and stride length is a choice that natural selection made clearly and decisively. But the muscles themselves are also worth examining. The musculature of a mountain goat is extraordinary in a specific way that is not immediately obvious from looking at the animal. Mountain goats are not particularly large. An adult male, called a billy, typically weighs somewhere between 125 and 180 kilograms, with females, called nannies, somewhat lighter. They do not look especially muscular in the way that we typically recognize muscularity, the way a bull looks muscular or a lion looks muscular. Their musculature is distributed differently, weighted heavily toward the hindquarters and the shoulder girdle, the areas that do the most work in the specific movements of climbing and descending steep terrain. The hindquarter muscles of a mountain goat are extraordinarily powerful relative to body size, built for the explosive push-off that allows the animal to launch itself upward onto a ledge or across a gap in the rock face. The shoulder and neck muscles are built for the controlled braking and stabilizing work of descent, absorbing the force of each footfall on a steep downward slope without allowing the body to accelerate beyond control. This is not a generalist body plan. This is a body plan that has been specialized for a specific physical task. The way a sprinter's body is specialized differently than a long-distance runner's body, even though both of them are running. There is a specific movement that mountain goats make that illustrates this muscle specialization perfectly, a movement that researchers studying the animals have called the bounce. When a mountain goat is ascending a very steep rock face and needs to move quickly, it does not take small careful steps the way a human climber might on the same terrain. It bounces. It makes a series of rapid, powerful, two-footed pushes, landing and immediately pushing off again in a movement that looks almost like a rubber ball being thrown against a wall and rebounding. The speed of this movement is startling. You expect caution and you get velocity. You expect hesitation and you get commitment. The bounce works because the musculature is powerful enough to push off hard, and the hooves are secure enough to land safely and push off again before the animal has time to lose balance. It is a strategy that trades caution for momentum, and it works because the system is reliable enough to support it. Now let us talk about something that does not come up enough in discussions of mountain goat locomotion, and that is the role of the skeletal structure in what these animals can do. Because the skeleton is not passive infrastructure, it is an active part of the biomechanical system. The vertebral column of a mountain goat is unusually stiff compared to many other ungulates. In running animals like horses and cheetahs, the flexibility of the spine is a key element of their locomotion, the spine flexing and extending like a spring to store and release energy with each stride, amplifying the output of the muscles. Mountain goats have sacrificed this spinal flexibility in exchange for a more rigid, stable core. A flexible spine is a liability on a cliff face. It means more variables in the movement system, more potential for a moment of instability. A stiff spine means the animal moves as a more unified whole, with less internal motion to manage and compensate for while the limbs are doing the complex work of finding purchase on irregular surfaces. The shoulder joint of a mountain goat also has a specific feature worth noting. The rotator cuff musculature and the joint geometry allow for an unusually large range of foreleg movement in the plane perpendicular to the direction of travel, meaning the goat can swing a foreleg out to the side to reach a foothold that is not directly in front of it to an extent that most ungulates cannot. This matters on a complex rock face where the available footholds are not arranged in a convenient straight line up the slope. The goat can reach sideways for a hold, place the foot securely, shift its weight over that foot and then find the next hold. It can navigate the rock face in 3 dimensions, not just straight up. It is solving a 3-dimensional geometric puzzle with its body in real time, and its skeletal architecture allows it to do so. There's also the tail, which in mountain goats is short and held relatively still during movement. This is in contrast to many other animals that use tail movements for balance compensation. The mountain goat does not need tail-based balance compensation to the same degree because its balance system is operating at a different level of refinement. The small, controlled tail is another indicator of a system that has been refined toward precision rather than brute compensation. We need to talk about the sensory system now, because all of the physical hardware we have been discussing only works if it is being driven by a sensory and neural system of comparable sophistication. And the mountain goat's sensory system is extraordinary in ways that are not always appreciated. Start with the eyes. Mountain goats, like many prey animals, have eyes positioned on the sides of the head rather than facing forward. This gives them a field of view of roughly 320 degrees, nearly panoramic, meaning they can see in almost every direction simultaneously with only a narrow blind spot directly behind them. For an animal that lives with the constant threat of predators including wolves, mountain lions, bears, golden eagles, and wolverines, this panoramic vision is obviously valuable. But on a cliff face, it serves an additional function that is equally important. The mountain goat is, moment to moment, doing something that requires enormous amounts of visual information processing. It is scanning the rock face ahead of it for the next sequence of footholds. It is tracking the position of its own body relative to the face. It is monitoring for loose rock, for unexpected changes in surface texture, for the shadows that indicate ledges and the highlights that indicate edges. All of this visual processing is happening simultaneously and continuously, not sequentially, because on a cliff face you do not have time to look at one thing and then look at another thing. You need to see everything at once. The rectangular pupils of mountain goats, a feature shared with other goat and sheep species, are adapted for this. The horizontal elongated pupil shape allows the goat to maintain a sharp horizontal horizon image even when the head is tilted, because the pupil rotates slightly within the eye to keep its orientation aligned with the horizon as the head moves. This is a neurological and anatomical mechanism that keeps the horizontal field of view maximally sharp regardless of head position. For an animal that is constantly tilting its head at different angles to look at the rock face above and below, and to the side, this automatic pupil rotation means the visual information coming in is always optimally oriented, always calibrated to the horizontal plane that gives the animal its spatial reference. The depth perception of mountain goats has been a subject of genuine scientific interest. Forward-facing eyes, like human eyes, provide excellent binocular depth perception through stereopsis, the brain's ability to compare the slightly different images from two eyes and compute distance from the disparity. Side-facing eyes, like goat eyes, have much less binocular overlap and therefore less stereoscopic depth perception in the conventional sense. For a long time, this was thought to mean that prey animals with side-facing eyes had poor depth perception, a trade-off wide-field vision bought at the cost of distance judgment. The research on this has become more nuanced. Mountain goats do have a significant binocular zone in the forward direction, wider than you might expect given how far to the side their eyes are positioned, and there is evidence that they use motion parallax, the shift in apparent position of near and far objects as the head moves, as a depth cue that partially compensates for reduced stereopsis. When you watch a mountain goat approach a cliff edge, you will often see it bob its head slightly in a specific way before making a jump or a large step. This is almost certainly active parallax computation, the animal moving its head deliberately to generate the motion parallax information it needs to judge the distance to the next hold. It is computing depth by moving its own head and watching how the visual world shifts. It is using its own movement as a measuring instrument. Now the vestibular system. Balance. This is where mountain goats may have their most remarkable adaptation of all, and it is the one that is hardest to see from the outside because it is entirely internal, a matter of inner ear architecture and neural processing that produces the visible result of an animal that simply does not fall. The inner ear of mammals contains the vestibular organs, the semicircular canals and the otolith organs, that sense head rotation and linear acceleration, and provide the brain with the information it needs to maintain balance. In mountain goats, the vestibular system shows anatomical features consistent with exceptional sensitivity and speed of response, a system tuned for rapid detection of the small balance disturbances that occur constantly on uneven terrain. The three-dimensional semicircular canal system, sensitive to rotation in all planes, is the rapid response element, telling the brain within milliseconds that the head has started to rotate in a particular direction. The otolith organs, sensitive to linear acceleration and to gravity, provide the slower but more sustained information about the body's orientation relative to vertical. The integration of these inputs in the mountain goat's brain happens with a speed and precision that produces what you observe as the extraordinary stability of the animal on terrain where instability seems inevitable. When a foothold crumbles slightly, when the body starts to tip, the vestibular system detects it in time for the muscular system to respond before the tip becomes a fall. The window of time between detection and response needs to be very small, measured in tens of milliseconds, because on a vertical cliff face the margin between a correctable tip and a fatal fall is narrow. The mountain goat's nervous system, from sensory detection through to muscular response, operates within that window. The whole neural pathway has been refined by selection for speed, because in this animal's environment slow reflexes are not an inconvenience. Slow reflexes are death. There is a concept in biomechanics called the corrective response threshold. The smallest perturbation that an animal's balance system will automatically correct for without it being perceptible as a stumble or a loss of control. In mountain goats, this threshold is remarkably low. They correct for small perturbations so rapidly and so completely that you do not see the correction happen. The animal looks like it never loses its balance, but it is not that it never encounters small losses of balance. It is that it corrects them before they become large ones, at a speed that makes the correction invisible. Let us talk now about the behavioral dimension of mountain goat movement, because the physical hardware is only part of the story, and in some ways the behavioral dimension is even more fascinating, because it reveals that what mountain goats do on cliff faces is not purely instinctive reflexive movement. It involves something that looks very much like planning. Mountain goats are browsers and grazers with home ranges in alpine terrain, typically above the tree line, at elevations between 1,000 and 4,000 meters depending on the latitude and the specific mountain range. The Rocky Mountains, the Cascades, the coastal ranges of British Columbia and Alaska, these are the primary habitats of the North American mountain goat. They share this terrain in different mountain systems around the world with various related species including the ibex, the chamois, the markhor and the barrel, also known as the Himalayan blue sheep, each of which has evolved its own variation on the basic theme of extreme terrain specialization. We will come back to some of these relatives, but for now let us stay with the mountain goat. Within its home range, a mountain goat moves through terrain that it knows. This matters enormously. The movement of a mountain goat on a familiar cliff face is qualitatively different from the movement of the same animal on unfamiliar terrain, and experienced observers of these animals in the field can often tell the difference. On familiar terrain, the goat moves with a fluid, almost automatic quality, placing its feet with a precision and speed that suggests the route is in some sense already calculated. The sequence of footholds has been learned. The animal knows where the ledge is before it gets there, knows which direction the next section of the route goes, knows where the awkward section is and how to navigate it. It is not solving the problem from scratch each time, it is executing a known solution. This route learning begins early. Kids, the young of mountain goats, follow their mothers through the terrain of their home range from very soon after birth, learning the routes and the techniques by watching and by doing. A mountain goat kid a few weeks old is already navigating terrain that would stop most adult humans cold, but it is navigating it hesitantly, making mistakes, falling small falls that it recovers from because its mother chose routes with a slight margin for error, building the physical skills and the spatial memory simultaneously. By the time a kid is a few months old, it is moving with growing confidence. By the end of its first year, it has a detailed spatial map of a significant portion of its home range. A three-dimensional map that includes not just the locations of ledges and routes but information about their quality, their reliability, their difficulty under different conditions. Because conditions change, this is something the purely mechanical description of mountain goat locomotion misses. Rock surfaces that provide secure grip when dry become dramatically less secure when wet. Surfaces that are stable in summer can be covered with a thin film of ice in early morning and autumn, invisible to the eye and treacherous underfoot. Snow changes the whole picture, covering familiar ledges, altering the visual texture of the terrain, adding load to surfaces that might be weakened beneath. A mountain goat navigating its home range is doing so in a terrain that is seasonally and daily variable in ways that require constant updating of the route knowledge. The behavioral response to this variability is interesting. Mountain goats in conditions of poor visibility, fog, falling snow, rain, tend to slow down significantly and adopt more cautious movement patterns even on familiar routes. They check footholds more carefully before committing weight to them. They choose routes with larger margins of safety, avoiding the tightest ledges and the most exposed traverses in favor of slightly longer routes with better holds. They are making risk assessments and adjusting their behavior accordingly. The platform of physical capability is not operated at maximum all the time. It is modulated by the animal's ongoing evaluation of the conditions. This risk-aware behavior extends to interactions with other mountain goats. Within a herd, there is a clear dominance hierarchy, and lower-ranking animals defer to higher-ranking ones on cliff routes where passing is not easily possible. This is not just social convention. It is practical necessity. On a narrow ledge where two animals cannot pass each other, an escalating conflict risks a fall for both of them. The social hierarchy that determines who yields and who passes is, in the context of cliff face navigation, a safety mechanism. It prevents the dangerous confrontations that would occur if animals of equal status met on narrow ledges and neither would yield. The social structure of mountain goat herds is also interesting from the perspective of knowledge transmission. Adult nannies spend most of the year in all-female herds with their young, separate from the billies that tend to be more solitary or form small male groups. The female herds maintain the most detailed knowledge of the best routes through their particular home range, the locations of the mineral licks that mountain goats seek out for the salt and other minerals they need, the escape routes into the steepest terrain that provides safety from predators, the best foraging areas in different seasons. This knowledge is held collectively and transmitted through the matrilineal structure of the herd. Young animals learn it from their mothers and from the other experienced females of the herd. Old females are the repositories of the most complete root knowledge, and their experience is a resource that the whole herd benefits from. Let us now talk about the predators, because the question we started with was why no predator can catch this animal, and we have been building the answer from the ground up. Now we have enough pieces to put it together properly. The primary predators of mountain goats are wolves, mountain lions, cougars, grizzly bears, and golden eagles, with wolverines and coyotes taking occasional young animals or weakened adults. Each of these predators has its own hunting strategy and its own particular challenge in the specific context of hunting an animal that lives in vertical terrain. The mountain lion is probably the predator that comes closest to being able to match the mountain goat in the vertical dimension. Mountain lions are extraordinarily athletic, capable of vertical leaps of up to 5.5 meters and horizontal leaps of nearly 8 meters. With the flexible spine and powerful hindquarters of a dedicated ambush predator. In forested terrain at lower elevations, mountain lions are extremely effective predators of deer, their primary prey. But mountain goats specifically inhabit terrain that reduces the mountain lion's advantages. The exposed, vertical rock faces where mountain goats spend most of their time provide almost no opportunity for the concealed approach that is fundamental to mountain lion hunting strategy. A mountain lion approaching along a cliff face is visible, and a mountain goat that sees a mountain lion coming on a cliff face has options that a deer in a forest does not have. The options are upward, always upward, into terrain that is more vertical, more exposed, more extreme, where the goat's specific adaptations give it an increasing advantage with every additional meter of elevation. A mountain goat fleeing upward on a cliff face is not running away from a predator in the conventional sense. It is moving toward safety, toward terrain where its physical platform is most capable and its predator's platform is most challenged. The mountain goat knows this. Its escape strategy is not simply to run but to climb, to increase the gradient until the terrain itself becomes its shield. Mountain lions do occasionally make kills on mountain goats, primarily young animals, injured animals, or animals that were in a compromised position when the lion was able to approach without detection. A mountain lion that can get within striking distance before the goat becomes aware of it has a chance. But the combination of the goat's panoramic vision, its ability to detect movement at long range, and its habit of choosing resting and foraging positions that allow it to see approaching predators from multiple directions makes this kind of surprise approach extremely difficult in the open alpine terrain that goats prefer. The mountain lion's ambush strategy requires concealment. Mountain goat habitat is specifically the terrain that minimizes concealment. Wolves are a different challenge and in some ways a more interesting one. Wolves hunt in packs and they hunt by pursuit, running prey animals until they are exhausted or until the pack can position animals to cut off escape routes. This strategy is devastatingly effective against deer and elk and caribou in open terrain. Against mountain goats in alpine terrain it largely fails, not because the goats can outrun wolves, they cannot in a straight race on flat ground, but because the goats can outclimb wolves on terrain that quickly becomes too steep and technical for wolves to follow. There are records of wolf packs hunting mountain goats, and what these records show is illuminating. The wolves chase. The goats move upward. The wolves continue as long as the terrain allows. The goats move higher. The terrain becomes too steep for the wolves to run effectively. The wolves stop. The goats are above them, safe on a ledge looking down. The wolves wait. The goats wait longer. The wolves eventually leave. This is not a chase that the goats escape by outrunning the wolves. It is a chase that the goats win by converting it from a race into a vertical problem, and the vertical problem has a solution that strongly favors the goat. The one scenario in which wolves can be effective against mountain goats is when the terrain allows the pack to separate an individual, particularly a young animal, from the group and prevent it from reaching steep terrain. Young animals are the most vulnerable because their route knowledge is less complete, their physical capabilities less developed, and their ability to make the rapid escape to vertical terrain less reliable. But even this is difficult for wolves in serious alpine terrain, where the proximity of escape routes is usually enough to allow a healthy adult to disengage before the pack can organize a cutoff. Grizzly bears are large, powerful, and in some contexts fast, capable of short sprints at impressive speeds. They are also excellent climbers of large rocks and boulder fields, significantly better than wolves at navigating complex terrain. Grizzlies do occasionally prey on mountain goats, particularly in the spring when goats are in lower elevation terrain and the bears are active after emerging from hibernation. But the bear's climbing ability, while considerable, does not approach the mountain goat's. The bear's body plan, the mass, the plantigrade foot, the proportions of the limbs, is not optimized for the kind of vertical movement that mountain goats perform routinely. A grizzly on a technical cliff face is working very hard and moving slowly. A mountain goat on the same cliff face is at home. The goat simply needs to get to terrain that is steep enough to make the pursuit unmanageable, and it needs to do it before the bear closes the initial distance. The goat's ability to accelerate rapidly into steep terrain is usually sufficient. Golden eagles are the most unusual of the mountain goat's predators because they operate in a completely different physical regime. They do not chase goats up cliff faces, they fly, and they use their flight to do something that none of the terrestrial predators can do, which is to attack from above. There are documented cases and filmed records of golden eagles diving at mountain goats, adult goats, and attempting to knock them off cliff ledges. The strategy is not to make a conventional predatory kill. The strategy is to use the eagle's aerial advantage to create a fall that does the work of the kill. Golden eagle dive bombing an adult mountain goat on a narrow ledge is betting on the goat's startle response, on the possibility that the sudden approach of a large, fast-moving aerial predator will cause the goat to step back off the ledge or lose its footing in the movement to evade. Sometimes this works. There are records of successful kills by this method, but the success rate is low, and the mountain goat's behavior on narrow ledges reflects an awareness of aerial threat. Goats on exposed ledges look up. They watch the sky. They keep their bodies oriented so that an incoming aerial attack is visible as early as possible. The same panoramic visual system that lets them watch for terrestrial predators coming along the cliff face also lets them monitor the sky. There's a behavior in mountain goats that researchers have described as position awareness, the tendency of these animals to choose resting and foraging spots that maximize their visibility advantage over approaching threats. A resting mountain goat is almost never in a position where it cannot see a large area of its surroundings. It will climb an extra distance to reach a promontory rather than rest in a sheltered hollow, even if the hollow might seem more comfortable. The exposure that looks like a liability, being visible to everything in the valley below, is actually a strategic asset because the goat sees every approaching threat at maximum range and has maximum time to respond. The most exposed position is the safest position. This is a fundamental inversion of the way most prey animals think about safety. Most prey animals seek concealment. They hide. They use terrain, vegetation, darkness to make themselves less visible. Mountain goats do the opposite. They seek exposure because in their terrain the ability to see a threat coming from very far away and to respond by moving into steeper terrain is far more valuable than the concealment that would hide them from the threat, but also reduce their ability to see it coming. Let us go deeper into the mountain goat's physical resilience, because the ability to navigate extreme terrain is only part of what keeps this animal alive. The ability to survive the physiological demands of living at altitude and in extreme cold is equally important, and it is a story that is as impressive as the locomotion. Mountain goats are obligate alpine animals. They are not animals that can live at low elevation and choose to go high. They are animals that belong to the high places physiologically and behaviorally, and they show this in their cold weather adaptations in a way that is almost extravagant in its completeness. The coat of a mountain goat is a double-layer structure. The outer layer consists of long, coarse guard hairs that can be over 20 centimeters in length, hanging in a shaggy, disheveled-looking curtain around the animal's body. These guard hairs are water-repellent. They do not absorb precipitation. Rain and snow slide off them without penetrating to the skin. Beneath the guard hairs is the undercoat, a dense, fine, woolly layer called kivyut, an extraordinarily insulating fiber that by weight is considerably warmer than the finest merino wool. This inner layer traps air close to the body and creates a thermal buffer that is, in engineering terms, one of the most effective biological insulation systems of any cold-weather mammal. The combination of an outer layer that sheds weather and an inner layer that retains heat means that a mountain goat in a blizzard at 3,000 meters is not significantly losing body heat to the cold. The coat is doing its job so effectively that the animal inside it is comfortable by the standards of a mammal that evolved in these conditions. In winter, mountain goats often remain in alpine terrain well above the tree line when deer and elk have long since migrated to lower elevations. They have essentially no thermoregulatory reason to descend. The cold is not their problem the way it is the problem of animals with less effective insulation. The skin under the coat contains a dense network of blood vessels arranged in a countercurrent heat exchange system. Warm arterial blood flowing out to the skin and extremities passes in close proximity to cold venous blood returning from the skin, and heat is transferred from the warm outgoing blood to the cold returning blood before it gets back to the core. This means the core body temperature is protected at the cost of allowing the extremities, the legs and hooves to be somewhat cooler than the core. The extremities do not need to be as warm. The core does. The heat exchange system directs warmth where it is most needed and accepts lower temperatures where they are least damaging. The legs and hooves of mountain goats are also adapted for cold weather contact with rock and ice. The tissues of the lower leg maintain flexibility at temperatures that would cause stiffness in normal mammalian connective tissue. An adaptation that ensures the fine motor control of the hoof remains available even in extreme cold. A hoof that becomes stiff and unresponsive in freezing temperatures is a liability on a cliff face. The mountain goat's hoof does not stiffen. It functions in temperatures that would stop most other mammals from moving at all. Now the cardiovascular and respiratory systems. Living at altitude means living in air with lower oxygen partial pressure. At 3,000 meters, each breath contains about 30% less oxygen than the same breath taken at sea level. At 4,000 meters, the deficit is around 40%. For a lowland animal suddenly transported to this altitude, the result is altitude sickness, with symptoms ranging from headache and nausea to, in severe cases, pulmonary and cerebral edema, fluid accumulation in the lungs and brain that can be fatal. For mountain goats, altitude is normal. Their bodies are designed for it. The red blood cells of mountain goats have a hemoglobin variant that has a higher affinity for oxygen than lowland mammal hemoglobin, meaning it binds oxygen more readily at the lower partial pressures present at altitude. Mountain goats also have a higher red blood cell density in their blood than most lowland mammals, more oxygen carriers per unit volume, which increases the oxygen transport capacity of the blood. And their lung tissue shows adaptations consistent with more efficient gas exchange at low oxygen pressures, more alveolar surface area, more capillary density in the lung wall, better transfer of oxygen from air to blood at each breath. The result is an animal that climbs steep terrain at high altitude and generates the enormous muscular output that this requires without going into oxygen debt the way a lowland animal would. The heart and lungs keep the muscles fueled with oxygen through sustained, intense physical exertion in an environment where the oxygen is scarce by lowland standards. This is not just impressive athleticism. It is the result of millions of years of physiological refinement to the specific demands of the alpine niche, where the combination of physical challenge and reduced oxygen availability is a double pressure that the mountain goat has answered with a double adaptation. Let us talk about the mental dimension of what mountain goats do, because I think this is the most underappreciated aspect of the whole story. The physical platform